I almost had to DNF this book, not because I didn't like it, but because it gave me so many feels that I almost couldn't handle it. Hi, my name is Moana, and this is my reading buddy Spike. Wah. And I am a reading and writing lover who disliked English class as both a student and a teacher, and I am now documenting my journey of rediscovering my love for words. I finished reading Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Lynn Tan, and it actually took me a few days to get started on filming this review because I needed a couple of days to process my thoughts and think clearly enough to speak. What an emotional story! It was the kind of book that I got completely sucked into the entire world and had a difficult time navigating through my own daily life while I was reading it. In a previous video, I shared that I'm not a huge fan of fantasy novels, but I recently discovered a whole bunch of Asian fantasy novels that are based on myths, and I have been so into them. Daughter of the Moon Goddess is based on the Chinese legend of Chang'e, the moon goddess. Chang'e commits what is considered a crime and is banished by the celestial emperor and empress and imprisoned to a life of solitude on the moon. Little did the emperor and empress know that Chang'e had a daughter named Xingyan that she was secretly keeping with her on the moon. All of these characters are immortal with magical powers, and as Xingyan grows up, her magic starts to strengthen and become detectable. So in order to keep her safe and hidden, Chang'e sends Xingyan away from the moon to the celestial kingdom, where she is supposed to keep her identity secret from everyone. Xingyan ends up befriending Prince Liwei, who is actually the son of the celestial emperor and empress. So it becomes more important than ever for Xingyan to carefully hide the secret of her true identity. The world in this story was so beautifully crafted that I could clearly envision every scene in my mind, and it actually felt like the kind of escape that I was craving for in a novel. It's the kind of book that you read when you feel like you want to run away from our own world and your own life for a little while. This book is categorized as an adult novel, but it kind of reads more like a YA novel to me, and I read that many young adults have been enjoying reading it just as much as adults. The relationships that blossom in the story are a slow burn type of romance, which I much prefer over the type that is more like love at first sight, because I see that kind of love more as just lust rather than love, and it just annoys the heck out of me, to be honest. The pacing was so wonderfully done because I felt like I was falling in love with the characters as they were falling in love with each other. And usually I hate love triangles, and this story kind of had something like a love square, but it was carefully done in a way that propelled the plot forward rather than just being a cheap shot at trying to add some excitement to the story. It was such a roller coaster of emotions the whole time that I had to keep taking breaks from reading because I felt like my heart couldn't handle it. I'm going to be honest, when it comes to stories that I get so emotionally vested in, I usually end up looking up spoilers so that I can at least emotionally prepare myself for any possible tragedy or heartbreak to come. And this book turned out okay though, and safe enough for me to finish reading, but it is a duology and it sounds like the second book might leave me heartbroken like so many other people have shared. So I'm gonna wait a little bit, I'm gonna wait a while before I move on to reading that one. I never understood why people annotate their fiction novels. I used to annotate my textbooks when I had to study in college, but that was for the sake of referring back to important information to study for exams. So it didn't make any sense to me why people would waste their time annotating fiction that they read for fun, but I can see why people would do it for this novel. There were so many beautiful passages that I felt like I wanted to remember forever and would have annotated and highlighted if I had been reading a physical copy of the book. For example, one of my favorite lines was, "Everyone has their own troubles. Some lay them bare while others hide them better," which I think is such a great lesson for all of us to learn. It's easy to get upset at others when they're not doing what we believe they should, but we really never know how others are struggling. Another quote that I loved was, "You'll never grow if you only do what you're good at," she had said. "The most difficult things are often the most worthwhile." I think this is such a great reminder for anyone to keep challenging themselves to learn and grow every day. I really think that not only was this book great entertainment, but there are a lot of great life lessons to be learned for readers of all ages. When I was in middle and high school, mythology meant one thing: Greek myths. Zeus, Hercules, Poseidon, those were the only mythological stories that seemed to exist in our curriculum. And honestly, I did not really enjoy them. They felt distant, repetitive, and frankly boring. As a student, I couldn't connect to the stories, and as a teacher, I watched my students struggle with the same disconnection. These myths felt like homework, not living, breathing stories that could actually teach us something about human nature, culture, and imagination. Something definitely changed when I discovered Asian mythology, which I didn't even realize existed when I was in school. Books like Daughter of the Moon Goddess opened up entire worlds I never knew existed. On a side note, the first book that I discovered that got me into Asian mythology was The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie O, and I absolutely love that novel. I'm not going to talk about it in this video because I will probably go into depth about it in a future video, but if you haven't read it yet, I definitely recommend that you check that one out. So after discovering these types of books, suddenly mythology wasn't just a list of gods and monsters to memorize. It was a window into rich, complex cultural experiences. Our education system does a massive disservice when it presents mythology, and really literature in general, as a monolithic, Western-centric experience. By limiting students to Greek myths, we're essentially telling them that only one cultural narrative matters. We're saying that the rest of the world's incredible stories, legends, and cultural wisdom are somehow less important. Take the Chang'e Moon Goddess legend, which inspired the Daughter of the Moon Goddess. It's a story of sacrifice, love, immortality, and transformation. It's philosophical, it's emotional. It challenges readers to think about duty, family, and personal choice in ways that go far beyond simple storytelling. To me, this book was actually storytelling at its finest, and I think it's a shame that students are being forced to read only Greek mythology and missing out on chances to read stories like this. When we diversify our reading lists, we do more than just introduce new stories. We expand cultural understanding, we challenge existing narratives, we teach empathy, and we show students that their own cultural backgrounds have value. We also demonstrate that great storytelling is universal. As a teacher, I wish I could go back and show my students these rich, diverse mythological narratives. I wish I could have demonstrated that mythology isn't just about memorizing names and plots. It's about understanding human experiences across different cultures. Books like Daughter of the Moon Goddess aren't just entertaining. They're educational gold. They invite readers to explore complex themes of identity, sacrifice, and personal growth through a lens that might be completely new to them. But let's talk about something even more critical. What happens when students don't see themselves in the books they're required to read? When I was in school, almost all of my required reading was written by and about either white Americans or white Europeans. Growing up in Hawaii, we did have some reading assignments based on Hawaiian mythology, but those were only specifically in Hawaiian class, which I only really remember taking for a year in intermediate school. After that, all of the literature for my English classes were mostly American or British. The only novel that I can remember that really stood out to me was Amy Tan's The Kitchen God's Wife, which I absolutely loved, and if I remember correctly, was the only required book that I actually loved reading. Amy Tan has written several best-selling novels such as The Joy Luck Club, which was such a big hit that it was even turned into a movie. All of them are very entertaining and easy to read, and they are mostly based around the lives of Chinese and Chinese American women. So I don't know if it was just because The Kitchen God's Wife was so much easier to read and understand than my other required books such as Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet or John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, but this is the only book that I remember actually enjoying and truly engaging with. However, now when I look back, as an Asian American woman, I kind of think that maybe the biggest reason why that book stuck with me so much is because I could identify with it so much more easily than I could with all of the others. F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby was interesting, but it had almost no relevance to my own life. When I read The Kitchen God's Wife, though, even though I am not Chinese, I'm actually Filipino Okinawan, I could still see so much of myself and my own family history in it since there is a lot of similarity to my own ethnic heritage and that of the book. So this got me thinking about how much more of a big deal it is that students are often required to read only Greek mythology and are missing out on the opportunity to read mythology from other cultures, such as the book that this video is about. For Asian American students, this isn't just about missing out on interesting stories. It's about erasure. It's about eraser. It's about being told repeatedly and systematically that your cultural experiences don't matter. When every book on the required reading list reflects only European or American experiences, you're sending a devastating message. Your story isn't important enough to be told. Imagine being a young Asian American student sitting in a classroom reading book after book where nobody looks like you, sounds like you, or experiences the world the way you do. You're constantly positioned as an outsider, always expected to empathize with and understand narratives that don't represent your own experience, while your own rich cultural heritage is rendered invisible. This isn't just about representation, it's about identity, and it's about belonging. When students don't see themselves in literature, several devastating things happen. They begin to internalize the idea that their stories aren't valuable. They might feel disconnected from their own cultural heritage. Their sense of self-worth can be dramatically impacted. They learn to view their own culture as secondary or less important. Books like Daughter of the Moon Goddess do something revolutionary. They say to Asian American students, your stories matter. Your mythology matters. Your cultural experience is not just valid, it's just as extraordinary as the ones that are forced on us at school as part of the mainstream. On a bit of a superficial note, growing up, I used to think that I could never be beautiful because every time I read stories about gorgeous women, they were always described as tall, blonde, and with blue eyes, and here I was, average height with brown hair and brown eyes. I always thought that the ideal image of beauty was someone like Nicole Kidman or Paris Hilton or Reese Witherspoon. All of these women who I looked nothing like. It actually wasn't until I started watching Asian dramas and reading Asian stories that I started to see that Asian women were beautiful as well. I know that I'm not alone in feeling this way, and there are so many diverse cultures out there that it would be impossible to expose students to all of them in their required reading. I know that the system will never be perfect and it will never accommodate everyone, but I do think that we could be doing a much better job than we are now of having students read more diverse literature. So in closing, if you're interested in exploring beyond traditional Greek myths, I cannot recommend Daughter of the Moon Goddess enough. It's a beautiful, transformative read that proves mythology is so much more than what we learned in school. There is so much more that I wanted to say about this story, but in case you didn't read it, I didn't want to spoil it for you. But if you did read it already, I would love to discuss it in further detail in the comments. I have so many things that I wanted to say. I have some strong opinions on the romance portion, especially the love square. So let me know if you did read it. I would love to talk about it with you. Also, drop a comment below. What mythological stories have you discovered that changed your perspective? I would love to hear about them. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. And if you enjoyed it, make sure you hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to see more of my book reviews. Until next time, happy reading and see you soon. Bye!